How's it going, traders? It's time for my favorite Pokemon Pocket video of the week. I've dug through over 2,000 deck lists that were played in competitive tournaments in this past week, and I found the most interesting ones that put up some solid finishes. Let's go ahead and dive on into some of the new sweet things that players found success with recently. We kick things off today with a Berry Snorlax Magnezone deck that had two different people finish 5 and 2 in the Swiss rounds of the Hoaglandia Spraggles Open tournament this past weekend. Snorlax, in particular with Berry, is a card that I've been very impressed with in my games. When you have first energy advantage with these two, you get to hit for 100 when you attach your second energy, and then if you have a second berry, you can hit for 100 again, and then work your way up to 4 energy to just keep smashing every single turn with this potent basic Pokemon. One of the things I really like about this particular build is that Magnezone builds itself up in the background, so while you're investing all your energies in this Snorlax lead, when it eventually goes down, you have another beefy 140 HP attacker lined up behind it that just keep hitting for triple-digit damage. I also love that the extra energy that Magneton is generating on the stage 1 can be dawned up to Snorlax, kind of acting as a makeshift second berry to allow you to keep collapsing turn after turn, getting these 100 points of damage up consistently early. I really love the inclusion of Space Time Smackdown Shaman as the 5th basic Pokemon in this deck, as the extra sustain that it provides really leans into the fact that you have a ton of high HP single knockout point Pokemon and are going to be regularly making your opponents deal 400 plus points of damage if they want to secure those 3 knockout points to beat you. Next up, we have a Darkrai Magnezone Snorlax Berry variation that went 8-1-1 in the 10 Swiss rounds of the Ursi Day tournament this past weekend as well. With the 2 inclusions of Rocky Helmet in this deck, it's almost following the Darkrai Magnezone deck we saw dominate last season, only instead of playing Druddigon, we're kind of building our own lead with the 140 HP Snorlax that can also threaten to deal some massive damage with attacks, thanks to the 2 copies of Berry letting you hit with it that much sooner. I really love the dynamic that Rocky Helmet brings to a core like this because it lets your Snorlax kind of serve double duty. You can put energy on it and get smacking in the games where you have Berry, but in the games where Berry is nowhere to be seen, you can just put Snorlax up front with the Rocky Helmet on it and just use it to stall, doing its best Druddigon impersonation, letting you get chip shots with your Darkrai from behind or build up a Magnezone or 2 to get blasting once Snorlax eventually goes down. Next up, we had a build of Garchomp featuring Arceus EX as a backup plan, go 5 and 2 in one of our community tournaments. I really like the concept of pairing Arceus with a potent stage 2 like Garchomp, because you'll have games where your stage 2 Pokemon comes together and it can carry and win the game all on its own, but as anybody who's played a lot of Pokemon Pocket will know, getting 3 cards in the right combination is something that's just not going to happen in a number of your games, even when Pokemon communication is involved. In enter Arceus, which can power up with energy in our backline while we hide behind Gibbles and Gabites, or even a copy of Heatran here acting as a wall, and then serve as an attacker all on its own. I also think in the games where Garchomp gets online and you still have an Arceus behind it, this deck can kind of follow that EX Pokemon into second EX Pokemon that's really solid, making your opponent chip through 2 high HP things in order to eventually win the game. Our second unique Arceus build, finishing 6 and 2 and top 64 in the Hoaglandia Spraggles Open Series tournament, was playing Exeggutor and Carnivine in an all-grass build. I really like this deck from a pure theory standpoint. Exeggutor EX is phenomenal when you're going first and have first evolution advantage, start chunking out a lot of damage quickly, and Carnivine is stellar when going second, letting you start attacking for 50 or even 60 occasionally with the copy of Giovanni right away. I like that both of these Pokemon also have an incredibly low energy investment to get started, so you put your first one on them, and that gives you time to start building up Arceus in the backline to be your inevitable finisher. I also think this is a stellar deck for featuring Pokemon communication, because sometimes you're going to be wanting digging for Arceus, other times you're going to want to find your stage 1 more consistently. It really feels like a super elegant blend of things, and I wouldn't be surprised if this type of core is the ideal grass deck moving forward. Next up, we have a Blastoise Palkia deck that went 5-2 in the Swiss rounds of the Hooglandia Spraggles Open Tournament. This is also a deck list I featured recently on the channel that I brewed up to get my 5-win streak event done. I think it's really solid from a pure deck building theory standpoint. It was awesome to see it get some real competitive results in a tournament. Essentially, both Palkia and the Blastoise line are cards that are pretty solid when you lead on them, but are also really good finishers when you're building them up in the back. Blastoise in particular, having both a 2 and 3 energy attack, means when you're going first, you evolve into War Turtle, and then you evolve into Blastoise, attach your second energy, hit for 40, and then you attach your third energy, hit for 100, and keep going from there. When you're going second, you can go 20 into 40 into 100 for a nice clean 160, right in a 1-2-3 beat. Palkia, especially in tandem with the Rocky Helmet, gets a single energy attached to it as your lead Pokemon, dealing effectively 30 per turn cycle for a single energy, giving you a lot of time to build up a Blastoise to its full 160 damage attack in the back, which is an incredible breakpoint into all of the 140 Arceuses that are often wearing a cape to try and give them more survivability. Our newest supporter, Irida, really ties the whole room together in this deck. Healing 40 off of everything that has water energy attached to it means your opponent's generally going to have to deal 400 plus points of damage to get through your Palkia plus Blastoise while just knocking out 2 Pokemon. There's also a Manaphy Blastoise list that put up a number of 7-2 finishes across varying community tournaments in this past week as well, which I think is a testament to what I talked about a moment ago, that Blastoise's 160 damage breakpoint is really stellar against what a lot of people are doing in this metagame. In particular, Manaphy and Giratina lets you stall while accelerating energy to get Blastoise fully ramped up to start clearing your opponents out. This deck list is pretty all in on assembling Big Blue, having no other attackers, so we've got 2 Pokemon communications as well as 2 capes. That way we can get to our stage 2 as consistently as possible and also make sure that it lives as long as possible once it gets up to the front line. If you're looking something that's a little bit more linear while playing Blastoise, this is probably an excellent choice. Speaking of Manaphy variations, a Glaceon Manaphy deck finished in the top 8 of the Hooglandia Spraggles Open with a final record of 9-2. Glaceon in particular looked pretty impressive in a number of the games that we watched during our coverage, especially against all of the various fighting decks that are running around. It dealing effectively 100 points of damage in one go with its 3 energy meant that it cleans out everything in that single knockout point deck really cleanly. The flexibility of this deck being able to move into Vaporeon occasionally as well looked really potent, especially in tandem with Palkia EX being something that you could wash out extra energy on to Dimensional Storm multiple turns in a row. This deck list also gets to leverage 2 copies of Irida to give a lot of sustain while you shuffle your water Pokemon around, maximizing the amount of damage that your opponent has to deal in order to beat you. Next up, we have an 8-2 finish for the all water energy, all grass Pokemon deck that's been making the rounds in the various content spaces. For people who aren't familiar, our new supporter Irida specifically heals Pokemon that have water energy attached to them, not water energy in the typing, and Leafeon and Yanmega essentially only need colorless energy to attack, so by playing water energy with them, we get to play Erica and Irida to give these Pokemon an incredible amount of sustain. One noteworthy thing in this first successful run for this archetype that I think is worth calling out is the 2 copies of Giant Cape. I've seen other configurations trying to play Rocky Helmet or other utility cards in those slot, but I think Cape is definitely optimal because you want to maximize the chance that your stage 1 survive a single big hit, so that way you can retreat them to your bench and get them healed back up with Erica and Iridas to maximize the amount of survivability that your cards have game to game. If you are a Probopass enjoyer, there were 2 different deck lists that found success with it this week. A Dialga Probopass deck went 7-2 in one of our community tournaments, and a Skarmory Magnezone deck featuring a Probopass as its EX finisher had a 7-3 result in another. While I would be skeptical that Probopass is necessarily optimal inside of these decks, i.e. playing it over something like Arceus alongside Dialga, or even, honestly, just Arceus in the Magnezone Skarmory deck as well. It's worth noting that this card is close enough to reasonably setted that if it's a character that you really enjoy, you can definitely play with it and find success in things like the random queue, especially if it's putting up results inside of these community tournaments. Next up is a Pidgeot Druddigon deck, which is an archetype that had success in previous seasons that gained an interesting new support card in Irida. I really love to see more decks experimenting with the idea that Irida is technically a supporter you can splash so long as you're making some amount of water energy. Since Pidgeot only needs colorless to attack, this deck list gets to play fire and water energy so that Druddigon can play double duty. It's a wall giving you time to set up your stage 2 behind it, but you can also just put energies on it and attack in the games where your Pidgey is nowhere to be found. I also like that when we just get a water energy on Druddigon in this deck, Irida can go ahead and heal it up, giving it absolutely more sustain for the games where you need a little bit more time before your EX is fully ready. We're going to round out our deck list today with ones that aren't necessarily leveraging new cards, but they're definitely new decks to our metagame. We kick things off with a Marowak EX Primeape fighting deck that had a 7-3 finish in the Ursi Day tournament this past weekend. Specifically, Promo Mankey into Primeape that attacks for 2 energy is a really interestingly good curve against people that are leading on Arceus periodically in its variety of decks. The fighting weakness on Arceus means that Promo Mankey hits it for 50, and then Genetic Apex Primeape cracks it for 120, which is a total of 170, meaning you clear an Arceus through a copy of Cape and even a Shaman, healing it a single time. Marowak EX is an interesting inclusion. I would be curious to know if that feels better than something like Aerodactyl EX if you're looking to test and optimize this deck, but there's no denying that hitting for 100 for 2 energy into the fighting weak Arceus seems fairly appealing. Hitmonchan, I would assume, is the 1 energy damage dealer a choice to again lean more in on the fact that you want to be hitting for that fighting type advantage as often as possible in our existing metagame. Finally, there was a Mewtwo Gardevoir deck that's essentially straight out of the first season of Pokemon Pocket that posted a 7-3 finish in one of our community tournaments this week. It could have been a fluke, but this archetype also doesn't have a very high play rate, so it might be worth revisiting some of these older decks that have been pushed out during the Space-Time Smackdown metagame to see if perhaps they have legs to keep up with what's going on now. I think in particular, perhaps re-exploring things like Pikachu EX sounds appealing in a metagame where Misty decks are getting increasingly more popular, and this Mewtwo deck getting a sporadic result was a good reminder of that for me. If you want to see some of these off-meta decks and lots of others in action, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we're going to have deck highlights almost every single day this week and many more moving forward. If you enjoyed my roundup video today, make sure you smash the like button on this one. I appreciate everybody that made it all the way through to the end of the video, and I hope your next pack is an excellent one.